Prologue. The elderly Bilbo Baggins, Ian Holm, is writing a memoir during the preparations for the birthday party at the beginning of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring 2001. He recounts Erebor, the enormously opulent dwarven realm, and its relationships with Dale, the human kingdom, and the Wood Elves ruled by Thranduil Lee Pace. The dwarves are ruled by Thror, Geoffrey Thomas, the king beneath the mountain, to whom all other leaders pay allegiance. Dwarves, elves, and humans all prosper. The caves beneath Erebor, also known as the Lonely Mountain, which are rich in gold and jewels, are mined for an uncountable trove of treasure. The dwarves discover the Arkenstone, their most precious jewel, which Thor keeps above his throne. Smaug, a dragon, attacks Thor's kingdom one day. Despite the strong and astute leadership of Thor's grandson Thorin, Richard Armitage, Smaug destroys most of Dale and makes quick work of Erebor's defenses. The remaining dwarves flee, and Thorin is enraged when their former ally, the Elf King Thranduil, rejects to assist them, having been treated unfairly by Thror and his people when the dwarves refuse to share gems dug from the mountain with the elves. The dwarves strive to reclaim Moria, a dwarven kingdom in the misty mountains that was long overrun by orcs. The orc forces reject the dwarves, headed by a giant, pale orc named Azog, Manu Bennett. During the battle, Azog beheads Thror. Thorin, infuriated, assaults Azog. Thorin uses an oak log to defend himself after losing his shield early in the combat, earning him the nickname Oakenshield. He disables Azog by severing his arm, leaving him kicking and screaming to be dragged away by retreating orc soldiers. Thorin's father, Thror, goes missing, never to be seen again, distraught over the loss of his father. Eventually, the necromancer captures him off-screen. The defeat of Azog inspires the dwarves to recover their territory, although at the expense of the bulk of their population. Thorin inherits the remnants of his grandfather's empire, but his people are too few to protect Moria or regain Erebor. With nowhere else to go, the dwarves scatter to work as miners, smiths, and toymakers. After filling in the chronology leading up to his own debut in the story, Bilbo chooses to tell his nephew Frodo, Elijah Wood, the entire story of his voyage 60 years previously. A much younger Bilbo, Martin Freeman, is smoking outside his front door one morning in the Shire when a tallish fellow in a pointed hat and grey cloak appears. Gandalf the Grey, Ian McKellen, is the wizard attempting to enlist the last member of an expedition preparing to embark on a quest. Bilbo refuses to participate in any adventure, but Gandalf has other plans. He etches a dwarven rune on Bilbo's door with his staff. The next evening, as Bilbo sits down to eat, he is disturbed by a visitor, an intimidating dwarf named Dwalin, Graham McTavish, who acts as if he is anticipated. Balin, Ken Stott, Bifer, William Kircher, Beaufort, James Nesbitt, Bomber, Stephen Hunter, Philly, Dean O'Gorman, Keeley, Aidan Turner, Owen, John Callan, Gloin, Peter Hambleton, Nori, Jed Brophy, Dory, Mark Hadlow, and Ori, Adam Brown, join Gandalf for dinner. They sloppily carry all the food out of the cupboard, rearrange the furniture, eat and drink everything, and sing a ridiculous song to torment the poor hobbit. Chip the glasses and smash the plates. That's what Bilbo Baggins despises. Yet they amazingly clean all the dishes, if carelessly, and nothing appears broken. Thorin eventually arrives after meeting with their kin in the Erd Luin, the Blue Mountains. The dwarves intend to return to Erebor, and regain their realm as well as the dragon's treasure. A 13-person expedition encourages bad luck, so they want to recruit a 14th member. A burglar Gandalf assures them that Bilbo is, or will be, a first-rate burglar when the time comes. Gandalf also claims that Bilbo will provide the company with a little edge while penetrating Smaug's cave, because Smaug is unfamiliar with the scent of a hobbit, and Bilbo will be less detectable to the dragon. Gandalf also gives Thorin a key that opens a secret passage to Erebor, potentially making their infiltration of the mountain even more clandestine. Their contract stipulates that Bilbo will receive 1/14 of any profits. When Bilbo wakes up in the morning, the dwarves have all vanished, and he's disappointed that he's missed out on an adventure, but he discovers that Thorin has signed the contract. Bilbo suddenly chooses to join the gang. He meets them on the road and is given a pony to ride. His trip has begun, but he is still stuck in his habits, complaining about the pony rub causing a skin sore and even attempting to return to his hobbit hole. Thorin and company journey east for several days until, one evening, while investigating the loss of some of their ponies, Bilbo, Fili, and Kili, the two youngest dwarves, notice firelight in the distance. As they get closer, they notice 3 huge trolls. As the burglar, Bilbo is pushed forward to free 4 ponies imprisoned in a corral. He slips in but gets apprehended. When the trolls threaten to tear Bilbo apart, the dwarves are compelled to submit. The other half of the group is locked in enormous sacks, while the other half is chained to a large revolving spit over the trolls' fire. Bilbo buys time by claiming the dwarves are infected. Gandalf emerges out of nowhere, splitting a boulder with his staff, and sunlight floods through the opening, turning the trolls to stone. Recognizing that the trolls would have a cave to withdraw to during the day, they search for the concealed lair. Gandalf and the dwarves discover some nice elven swords, as well as a little treasure pile. Gandalf gives Bilbo the tiniest of the swords, eventually named Sting, explaining it will light blue when orcs and goblins are around. The other swords are the legendary Glamdring, which Gandalf keeps, and its companion, Orcrist, which Gandalf advises Thorin keep. Thorin is hesitant to use an elven sword, but Gandalf convinces him that such a magnificent weapon is difficult to come by. Later, one of the dwarves reports that all of the ponies have fled. Radagast the Brown, Sylvester McCoy, the region's wizard, enters in his rabbit-drawn sleigh. He warns Gandalf that evil lurks in the woodland and the abandoned fortress of Dol Guldur. He tells Gandalf about a battle with a spirit, the Witch King of Angmar, and hands him a thing wrapped in cloth. When the orcs arrive, Radagast rides off with his rabbit sleigh, declaring he will lead them away. The traveling party makes its way through a hilly open terrain, as the orcs pursue the brown wizard on terrible wargs. However, one orc hunts them down, and the fight catches the attention of the others. Before the orcs are driven away by elvish riders, Gandalf leads them into a deep hole in the rocks. The party emerges at Rivendell, home of Elrond, Hugo Weaving, after passing through the fissure. Thorin, who still despises elves, proclaims fiercely that this was Gandalf's goal all along. Elrond appears, accompanied by his riders, and joyfully greets Gandalf and the dwarves. Gandalf persuades Thorin to show the map to Elrond. Elrond detects hidden writing on the map that must be read on the same calendar day and at the same phase of the moon as when it was penned, which is fortunately that night. Under the moonlight, blue letters glow on the map. Elrond translates the instructions for finding the Lonely Mountain's entrance. The dwarves must be in a specific location on the mountaintop on a specific day in late summer, when the setting sun will reveal the entrance. Gandalf later encounters Saruman, Christopher Lee, Galadriel, Cate Blanchett, and Elrond. They talk about the enigmatic necromancer and some ominous forebodings. Saruman is unconcerned, claiming that the evil spirit was defeated ages ago and couldn't possibly gain enough power to return, let alone materialize again. Gandalf produces the wrapped-in-cloth thing he received from Radagast, a Morgul blade, a weapon of enormous evil power said to be buried deep in a mountain. Galadriel discreetly promises Gandalf assistance when it is required. Meanwhile, the dwarves and Bilbo keep traveling. While climbing a mountain, the company becomes embroiled in a battle when 3 stone giants come to life and begin fighting each other. Bilbo and the dwarves seek shelter in a cave. Thorin scolds Bilbo once more for having to rescue his life. Bilbo prepares to flee that night, dejected. Beaufort tries to persuade him to stay, but Bilbo is still unprepared for the life of adventure that the dwarves are accustomed to. Suddenly, Bilbo's sword flashes blue, the floor collapses, and the group falls into a fissure and onto a wooden platform, where goblins surround and capture them. In the pandemonium, Bilbo flees, but is pursued by a lone goblin. The two tumble further into the abyss. While the goblins are transporting the dwarves to the great goblin, Barry Humphries, Bilbo awakens to find Gollum, Andy Serkis, attacking and killing his unconscious goblin. Gollum drops a gold ring, which Bilbo places in his pocket. Gollum discovers the Hobbit and alternately threatens and wheedles as Bilbo points his sword at him. They agree to a riddle competition. If Bilbo wins, Gollum will reveal him the way out. If Bilbo fails, Gollum will eat him. In the goblin caves, the king examines the dwarves' swords and recoils at the sight of Orcrist, renowned to his people as Goblin Cleaver. He orders the dwarves to be slain and sends a message to Azog with the dwarves' whereabouts. A blinding white explosion stuns everyone as the goblins enter with 2 massive torture racks. Gandalf appears and exhorts the dwarves to flee. In an exhilarating and physics-defying chase, they gather their swords and dash down the shaky wooden walkways that traverse the goblin's lair. The Goblin King bursts upward on them as they cross the final wooden bridge. Gandalf murders him by severing his throat with Glamdring. The platform eventually collapses, plunging them into a deep chasm. Everyone lives, and they make their way to the Goblin's realm's back door. Bilbo and Gollum spar, and Bilbo solves the final riddle by asking Gollum what he has in his pocket. This is Gollum's ring. Gollum is outraged. This isn't a typical riddle, and refuses to keep the bargain. Bilbo puts on the ring, and is astonished to discover that he has become invisible to Gollum. Gandalf and the dwarves reach the bottom and flee the goblin tunnels, passing Bilbo and Gollum. Bilbo has the opportunity to murder Gollum, but instead hops over him. Gollum is even more agitated. Bilbo likewise flees into the daylight, where the goblins cannot quickly pursue him. The dwarves make their way to a woodland location to rest. Gandalf counts the heads and realizes that Bilbo is absent. Thorin feels he fled because he has long suspected Bilbo is not up to the adventure and merely wants to return home. Bilbo, who is still invisible, overhears Thorin shouting. He appears unexpectedly and informs Thorin and his companions that he wants to return home, but will stay with the dwarves because they do not have a home of their own. Thorin is unimpressed, but the other dwarves are glad that Bilbo has returned. Azog and his warg riders emerge unexpectedly and chase the group to the edge of a cliff, where they all climb trees. The snarling beasts, however, cut the branches and topple the trees. Gandalf captures a moth, talks to it, and then releases it. Thorin is surprised to find Azog still alive when he appears on his white warg. Gandalf hurls pinecone fireballs at the enemies below, and the area quickly catches fire, forcing the animals to flee. Thorin, cornered, decides to strike and rushes at Azog, but is struck down and appears to be a meal for Azog's mount. Bilbo joins the counterattack, sparing Thorin's life. The other dwarves quickly follow. when a flock of gigantic eagles appears and begins dumping the orcs off the cliff and carrying the dwarves away, the orcs gain the upper hand. Gandalf dispatched the moth to seek assistance. The final tree falls, but Gandalf is saved by an eagle. The eagles transport the group to the Carrock, a smaller peak in the middle of a river that provides them with temporary shelter. Thorin regains consciousness and expresses his gratitude to Bilbo, as well as his mistake in doubting him, claiming he couldn't have been more mistaken about Bilbo's bravery in combat. Bilbo notices the lonely mountain in the distance, and they all stare in wonder, realizing they're that much closer to home. A thrush flies towards the old dwarf redoubt's gates, taking a snail in its mouth and tapping it against the stone. Smaug rises inside from a mound of gold coins, opening one eye.